want to go to the gentleman from the 4th Congressional District in Massachusetts. That's Jake Auchincloss, who, of course, had a tour at Harvard University before he was a commissioned Marine and is now in the Marine Reserves. Congressman, thank you very much for the time on this very eventful Saturday morning. And I want to just get your reaction first. A question that we've been posing to a lot of our guests is sort of how they found out about this. And I wonder if you could kind of walk us through that and give us your sense of what happens next in the crucible of Congress. We know that there are these votes scheduled to happen on war powers. What teeth, what might does Congress have to bring to bear here, like what's happened over the last few hours?
Morning. Thanks for having me back on. The way I should have found out about this as a member of Congress is the president coming to Congress to request an authorization for the use of military force, and the people's representatives debating in plain view of the American public the merits of airstrikes, the nature of Iranian self-determination, and risks and benefits thereof. The way I actually found out about it is, like everybody else this morning, was opening the headlines and seeing that a reckless commander-in-chief had started a war of choice without congressional authorization and without explaining the strategic endgame. This is going to be tactically overwhelming. America does have air dominance above 10,000 feet in Iran, but it's strategically open-ended. And Congress is going to have to answer the questions that this president is asking.
Do you think this was an illegal action by the president?
Yes, he does not have authorization to do this. Under the War Powers Act, the only way that a president can commit U.S. forces into hostilities is if there is an imminent threat to the U.S. homeland. There is no imminent threat to the U.S. homeland from the Islamic Republic. The Islamic Republic is a brutal regime that has immiserated and repressed its own people. It is absolutely a threat to U.S. forces in the Middle East and, of course, to our allies in the Middle East. But it is not an imminent threat to the U.S. homeland. And if this president wants to make the case that America should use its aerial dominance to take out nuclear or ballistic assets, he has to come to Congress for that.
Congressman, I'm going to assume that you've watched the president's statement, all 8 minutes of it, and there is that part at the end when he raises the potential of there being loss of U.S. life as a result of all of this. I mentioned your military background, the fact that you're a reservist. How did that particular part of that statement resonate with you as you think about the president now, I guess, post this, having to justify the action to the American people and certainly to the military as well?
The American troops deserve a commander-in-chief who has to lay out his rationale in front of their representatives. When you sign up for the United States military, you understand that you may be risking your life for the flag and for the Constitution, but you expect your commander-in-chief and your officers to follow the rule of law, to ennoble that risk that you are taking, and he's failing to do so.
I also wanted to ask you, you mentioned, what is the end game here? Is it clear to U.S. forces what the mission is here? Is that mission regime change? Does the U.S. still do that?
That's a terrific question. I can remember being a young lieutenant in 2012 in Afghanistan, patrolling Taliban contested villages in southern Afghanistan. And as a lieutenant, giving commands to my platoon and not being able to nest that mission statement up into a higher commander's intent about what is it that we're trying to do here. And when you do that, you undermine readiness and esprit de corps within the armed forces, and you make it harder for commissioned officers to execute their writ. This president owes a clear rationale to Congress, and then Congress owes the American public a debate. So, for example, with regime change, if that is the president's stated intent, he already lied to the Iranian protesters once. He said help is on the way. This time around, what is the nature of the support he wants to provide? Does that mean boots on the ground? Does that mean cyber attacks? Does that mean covert action? Does that mean overt action? Congress should have to debate that and justify it to our own constituents.
Congressman, we spoke to your leader in the House yesterday, Hakeem Jeffries, and he laid out a very good civics lesson about the role that Congress is supposed to play here and what he hopes will happen here in the days ahead. But there are, I think, many Americans, Democrats and Republicans, who are dispirited with the role that Congress has played in recent years. I think they might perceive it as being less truthful than they have been in the past, not having the kind of the fortitude to stand up to the president, to be an equal branch of the government. What would you say to them in light of all of this, and how do you see your party working together here in the days to come to respond to this?
The American people are right to be frustrated with the Congress that has sidelined itself in its Article I prerogatives. We are beginning to see Congress reasserting itself on tariffs with tariff votes in the House on the Epstein files. And this is another opportunity with a war powers resolution coming up next week for Congress to reclaim its fundamental powers that the framers understood belong to the people's representatives and not to a chief executive. Ultimately, though, I don't expect Speaker Mike Johnson to be brave. What I do expect is for the American public to decide that if he won't be brave, they're going to send people to Congress who will be, and that Democrats are going to win the midterms, and we will hold this administration to account.
I mean, my question for you is the same one I asked Leader Jeffries. What exactly can Congress do? Is there anything you can actually do to stop a president who wants to take this action? I was going to ask you if you think some of your Republican colleagues will defect and join you on that, but it sounds to me like you're saying that's not really a possibility until the midterms.
Oh, I think some of the Republicans in the House may. I mean, this war powers resolution we're voting on next week is a bipartisan resolution, Massey and Khanna, Massey being a Republican. Mm-hmm. Now, whether it gets enough Republican votes in the House, one, to pass, and two, to compel action in the Senate is another matter. But ultimately, I think if the American public wants to see Congress fully assert its Article I powers, they should never expect a bunch of congressional Republicans to be the courageous leaders that this moment demands.
Do you look at this in isolation? I recall after the U.S. went and captured Nicolas Maduro, there was a conversation that took place about whether what happened there could be a template for other parts of the world. And so you look at the president's kind of tendency or inclination for adventurism. Do you see this as part and parcel of kind of a broader track? Do you worry that this is going to lead to more adventurism in the future? How do you think about this particular incident, kind of a broader sweep or context?
Middle East is complicated enough. I don't tend to analogize from other regions because the Middle East has its own history and context that we have to be humble about. But just focused on this region, I think what is critical is for there to be a consistent bipartisan blueprint for how we're approaching Iran. And what I would posit is that two things are really critical. First, we need American air supremacy in that region. That is absolutely vital to American interests. So Iran cannot rain down terror from the skies with nuclear, ballistic, or rocket fire. And America does need to support Iron Dome for Israel, and ultimately, I would argue, a regional air defense system. Supremacy is critical in the skies. But number two is we should be willing to offer a policy of mutual non-interference with Iran that says you stop messing around in Syria, in Iraq, of course, with Israel, with American troops stationed around the region, and we won't mess in your internal affairs. We'll persistently support the right of all people to have freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom to vote, but we will not attempt regime change so long as you stop messing around in other people's affairs. Congress could get behind that blueprint in a bipartisan way, and it could signal to moderate successors vying for power after the Ayatollah dies that there is a path to better relations and an improved economy. But that can't happen if we have one commander-in-chief offering, military action without strategic rationale.
Congressman, I want to ask you about these negotiations that were happening between Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner, and Iranian counterparts in Geneva, with the Omanis kind of being the go-between. The question I've been asking this morning is, was the U.S. negotiating in good faith? Because we have reporting this morning that the U.S. and Israel have been working on this plan for, the word was, weeks. They left those talks, scheduling another round of talks, technical talks, to take place next week. Do you think the administration was really ever serious about finding a peace deal with Iran?
I think they were about as serious about it as they were about drug interdiction being the casus belli in Venezuela.
What does that do for U.S. credibility when it tries to enter negotiations elsewhere? I'm thinking Russia, Ukraine. I'm thinking all of these conflicts that President Trump does like to solve and does like to tout as a peace dealer.
The bigger problem for U.S. credibility is weakness, actually. This president in Ukraine is just fundamentally negotiating from a self-imposed weak position, as opposed to authorizing long-range strikes against oil refineries around Moscow, for example, as opposed to taking frozen Russian assets and investing them in Ukrainian defense industrial complex, as opposed to sanctioning Russian oil exports. He is just basically ceding to Russia's core territorial demands. That's our core problem, is the perception of weakness. Same thing in China, by the way. The recent national security document was a significant backpedal about our stance in the Indo-Pacific that the Chinese Communist Party cheered along. That's our core issue. The credibility issue is certainly there, but it's going to be there for so long as this guy is president. The weakness is more of a threat to national security.
Congressman, thank you very much. Really appreciate the time on this very eventful morning. That's Jake Auchincloss of Massachusetts. He represents the 4th Congressional District.